Well, hello, 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 and welcome to the Friday Night Live Stream. My name is Dr. John Brittingham, and this is our Friday Night Live Stream for ethics, and I am extremely excited about the opportunity to get to do this here with all of you, provided anybody is here. Probably not, but you know what? That is okay. This is going to go relatively quickly, um, largely just because it's very non-formal. It's very much similar to the structure that I would use in most of my ethics classes, which is one one day would be more intense. This is the argument, and another day would be, hey, let's talk about some stuff that matters to people or whatnot, and how can we apply our various ethical thinkers that we are talking about the um, to the world in which we live. So that's what we're going to do tonight. It's basically going to be kind of like that. You are welcome to say something in the chat if you have a question, if you have comments, anything like that. I am thrilled that you are here. If you're here, and if you're not, if you're watching this later, you should really hang out and join the Friday Night Live Stream because they're fun. And um, I mean, I hope they're fun. This is the first time I'm doing it on a Friday, so we'll see. But anyway, today we're really going to do three different things. First, we're going to talk about this essay by Jonathan Heaps called Being You. Full disclosure, John Heaps is a very good friend of mine, and I think he's a great writer, and his essay just happened to align really well with one of the essays, one of the chapters of a book that we're doing for this ethics course. The chapter is sort of considering what responsibility means, and so I thought it'd be interesting to put these two thinkers who actually happen to know each other, Eric Severson, John Heaps. They happen to know each other. We all kind of met in various Nazarene slash Methodist slash we were all in Boston at the same time during grad school kind of a thing. So anyway, I really admire these two thinkers. I really enjoy engaging in their thought. And so that's what we're going to do today. And then I'm going to answer some of your questions from class. And if you've got any questions in the chat, then you are welcome to jump in and ask some questions and do stuff like that. I got my notes right here. So without further ado, I'm just going to barrel ahead. So first things first, John Heaps is a scholar of a guy by the name of Bernard Lonergan, who was a Catholic theologian in the middle of the 20th century. And in certain circles, he is a fairly big deal, and in other circles, he is the biggest deal. And what I found amongst people who really study Lonergan is, man, if they aren't just the kindest, friendliest folks. And I don't do Lonergan studies at all. I don't, that's just not my cup of tea. But man, again, Lonergan just somehow inspires a lot of folks who are really lovely to jump in and study him. So anyway, sorry, I'm checking all of the various live stream elements and things of that nature. This is says the stream is healthy. Hopefully that's true. Says I got a good connection, but also we shall see. I don't know why it's saying that. Anyway, we shall see. My apologies to those of you watching in the future if this is basically just me rambling for like a minute and a half trying to figure out what is going wrong or right or anything of that nature. Anyway, so Lonergan is hugely influential on the way that Heaps thinks, as are two other Christian thinkers, or Christian adjacent thinkers would be a better way of talking about it. Heaps and I also met in philosophy grad school. I continued on in philosophy. He continued into theology and religious studies, and that's sort of the stuff that he does. And so there is going to be some difference there, mostly methodological, not necessarily like substantial beyond that, really. Um, anyway, that said, the two other thinkers that influence Heaps, and I see their fingerprints all over this essay, are a guy by the name of Soren Kierkegaard and a guy by the name of Mr. Rogers. Um, Mr. Rogers is there mostly in the language. And what I really appreciate about the language that Mr. Rogers is using, or the language that Heaps is using that is connected to Mr. Rogers, is that it disarms you. Because you read this essay and it doesn't read like a standard philosophy essay or theology essay. It reads like someone is talking to you in the language that you might use to talk to people of any age. And I think that that's important because it disarms, and it, oftentimes in my experience, the language that we use to talk to children is the kindest language that we use. And as we get older, the less kind, the less thoughtful our language can become unless we want something. Whereas with kids, it seems like because they are the being that they are, we are, going to be, sorry, checking something. Because they are the beings that they are, we are going to treat them a certain way and act towards them in a certain way. So anyway, with that said, let's jump into more of the essay itself. I'll get to the Kierkegaard bit at the end. Kierkegaard is a Danish philosopher and thinker who had a lot to say about Christianity, a lot to say about ethics, a lot to say about what it means to be a self, and all of that comes into play in the finished version of this video when it posts after the live stream. I'll put a link to a video I have about Kierkegaard that kind of goes into some of the connections there. Not that I'm, a Kierkegaard expert. It's just it helps solidify, or hopefully helps you get a sense for what Kierkegaard is doing regarding talking about the self, and how that idea of selfhood then plays out in the work of Lonergan, not really Lonergan. Lonergan wasn't a huge Kierkegaardian, but in the work of the Heaps essay, but also in other areas. You'll see it all over the place. It's going to come up again in Severson, but a different work of Kierkegaard's. Anyway, so that's just so you can hear that I actually have my notes handy and ready. So, Heaps begins with this hottest of takes, that you are unique because you are you and no one else experiences the world like you do. The hottest of takes. It seems obvious. But one of the things that I think good thinkers do is they take something that is familiar to us, so familiar that we might not even think about it as being worthy of paying attention to, and say, I'm going to make this a bit more complicated. And in making this a bit more complicated, what's going to happen is you are going to begin to see that you don't know this as well as you did, and that's interesting, that's unique, that's something to pay attention to. Okay, so you are unique as a fact of being a being that exists. No one is exactly the way that you are. and no one acts the way that you act. There might be similarities in terms of action, but no one is you doing that action. And those actions say something about what you think and who you are. But at the same time, you are not reducible entirely to those actions. You are both your actions and more than your actions. You are both your thoughts and more than your thoughts. You are both where you come from and not, but also where you are going and also not. Right? It's this tricky sort of idea of the self as being both singular or unique and in motion. You are yourself when you are transcending yourself. I happen to know this is a very Aristotle thing that then gets taken up by Thomas Aquinas, not to the same extent as it is in Aristotle, at least as far as I know. Again, not a Thomas scholar. I do Latin American phenomenology, stuff like that, so that I'm way more familiar with. But also, it gets taken up in Lonergan. And this is the sort of thing that comes up again and again and again. This idea that to be a self is to be continually moving. Not necessarily physically, but in terms of the movement of time, in terms of the movement of self-understanding, in terms of the movement of what you pay attention to, which brings us to the first major area of the essay, what Lonergan calls the transcendental precepts. I've heard some people call them imperatives. You're not really... Well, they're in the imperative sense, right? Be this, be that. But they're meant to be something to explain both what you are doing, sort of as a human being trying to understand, but also something that you have some agency to connect to. So the very first thing is that Heaps talks about is not being attentive, it is being present. What does it mean to be present? All right. There are three stages. There's sort of coexistence in space and time. You are present simply because you are in a space with other beings, whether that is a digital space and we're in it together, or it is a physical space that you are in with other people, whether it is being in a similar geographical area at a similar time to other people. You are present to the events and goings on of that area during that time. But then beyond that, it is sort of a consciousness of bare existence. You are not just present, but now you're present and you see, oh, this is like a place that I know. These are people that I know. These are things I'm familiar with. This is my environment. And you're sort of aware of it. And then beyond that is the presence of attending to the sensations that are present to you. So it's not just, oh, this is my environment. It's now, this is an environment that maybe the room is too cold or too warm. Maybe it's too noisy. Maybe people are talking and they're distracting you. Maybe someone is saying something interesting and you're leaning forward to hear it. You are being present to the movement in the room as you are being present to the the internal things that are happening inside of your brain and inside of your body. Maybe you can't pay attention because you're hungry, and you're becoming aware of that. You're being present to what is going on. And it can be tricky in an online course, I think, especially, to try and be present when so much of it is dependent upon when you are able to get to it, or when you are able to think about the course materials. It can feel weird because, especially because, like, I've chosen to do this completely asynchronously. with the exception of the option of you jumping into the live stream to kind of watch me shout into the void. But I've done that because I think that you can be present to what is going on in the class as you are also trying to be present to and pay attention to your life outside of the class. And so my hope is that this makes it more possible for you to engage the course rather than an opportunity to or an occasion that makes you feel disconnected. So, hold on. Sorry. Let's get stuff going. Okay, cool. So that brings us to be attentive, right? There are elements in the world that impose themselves on our attention. They draw our attention. They grab our minds and say, pay attention to me. Anybody who's ever been around a toddler will know that this is the case. Dad, 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 dad. What? You answer the question they have. They ask it again and again and again. Same question, same answer. But why is this? But why is this? But why is this? Again, again, again. Right? Can you tell I have one? But that is calling to your attention. But there are other things that call to your attention too, right? And Heaps sort of outlines these. He says, attention is selective and focal. In a neurotypical brain, you cannot focus on everything all at once. You have to make choices about what you focus on. And what that means is that if you have to make choices about what you focus on, then you need to... Why is this doing... Okay. It's over here. Here we go. Look at that. Look at that. The flames are disappearing. I gotta fix the green screen. It's not being friendly. Oh, I know why. There we go. My fan is blowing in the wrong direction. There we go. There we go. Hopefully that helps the room feel a lot cooler. Hopefully it's hopefully you're not just hearing fan in the background. Hopefully you actually can hear me. Anyway. Just checking the stream. Any comments? No, does not look like comments. Okay. This is on something of a delay. My apologies if you comment and I'm like, all right, we're moving on. But I'll try to get to any pertinent questions, comments, thoughts, etc. at the end. So, where were we? Oh, yeah. In a neurotypical brain, you can't grab everything all at once. You have to be selective. And so all of the sensation that you perceive is not something that sort of stays with you. Instead, you only draw the information that your brain determines you need, and everything else just kind of fades out, and then your brain fills in the gap. And that's not paying attention. That's just being conscious. Being conscious. Being conscious. There we go. It means that you have not only a sort of cognitive process by which you filter out information, it means also that you have to make a choice about whether or not you are doing that, right? Whether or not you do engage and selectively choose and filter that which you pay attention to. And because you have a choice there, you have a choice to pay attention to the things that you are reading or the things that you are watching or the things that you are discussing and how you deal with that. When you pay attention and what you pay attention to is a part of what makes you the unique you that you are. It is a part of the unique you that you are. So, moving on, we're going to talk about being intelligent, being inquisitive, right? Being inquisitive, being intelligent. This is in more of the like Lonergan literature stuff. Intelligence is, as far as I understand it, taken to mean something closer to what the Latin word intelligare means, which is to kind of grasp. To legare is what holds a thing together. How is it bound together, kind of a thing. And so intelligent, to be intelligence, to be intelligence, intelligent. To be intelligent is to grasp at that which you are trying to understand, right? So being inquisitive, another way, the way that Heaps puts it, means that you're something other than just smart. It's not knowing trivia facts. To be intelligent is a process you can engage in, right? It is to engage with the ideas and the questions that you have. And so in engaging with the ideas and questions that you have, what ends up happening is that you make connections between them. And you make unique connections. You ask unique questions. You come up with unique ideas. And as Heaps says later on, some of the things that you think about, if you don't share them with other people, might not ever be thought. These questions might not ever be asked. Which is kind of wild if you think about it. That you might have a question. You might have a question that... sorry, I'm getting live stream stuff figured out. It's being weird. This is what happens. Say la vie. Okay. Don't know what's going on there. All right, no worries. Okay. So, jumping back into it. How you handle questions is something that is unique to you. Is what Heaps is trying to get across there. So, we then move to being reasonable. Being reasonable. What does it mean to be reasonable? It means that your ideas about these questions arise spontaneously, and what you do with them is important. Because to be reasonable in the sense that he's meaning is to not value every idea the same way, but to try to understand what it might mean to wrestle with the truth of a particular claim versus wrestling with the truth of something that you just know to be factually true, right? To wrestle with ideas is to wrestle with the spectrum of how true they are. And in wrestling with those ideas, in wrestling with how true an idea is, you find that there are certain constraints that, if imposed on what you're talking about, actually focus in on what is really true, right? These ideas call for more precise definitions. To be specific is to not allow untruth free reign. And it's really difficult when you start to get specific and to ask very specific questions. It's really difficult for things that are untrue or unthought through or poorly constructed to persist, right? Think about any number of difficult, controversial ideas right now. Should people get a vaccine for global pandemic? Yes. The answer is yes, you should. Not a medical doctor, but you should. Check what the CDC says. You should. Should you wear a mask? Yeah. CDC says you should. most scientific experts in the field of epidemiology are saying that you should. Is that understood within the same context as, is Spider-Man real? No, not at all. Not at all. Right? Or is uh, is Spider-Man 2 the best superhero movie? Arguably, yes. Some people are going to point to Dark Knight, other people Spider-Man 2, other people are going to say something like Captain America Winter Soldier. I'm going to go with Spider-Man 2. Can't fight with Alfred Molina. Come on. He's just too perfect as Doc Ock. But then again, your mileage may vary. The point of that being that to be reasonable is to wrestle with the spectrum of ideas, to wrestle with a different way of, not different way, to wrestle with whether or not an idea is worth persisting if it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. It is to scrutinize. And then finally, Heaps talks about being responsible. To be responsible is to choose to be present. It is to choose to be focused on the most important questions that you might wrestle with. To be responsible is to ask questions, come up with ideas about those questions, and test those ideas. More questions, challenge them. And this is something that you do both naturally and uniquely. And so what happens is that to be a responsible person for Heaps is to be someone who wrestles with the uniqueness of your situation and your ability to think through these ideas in your situation in only the way that you can. And that connects us to Severson. So we're going to talk about Severson for a little bit, then we're going to get to questions from class, and then we're going to call it a night, okay? So being a self for Severson is to be one's responsibilities, or to put it in Heaps' language, being a self is being responsible. Even when you are irresponsible, you are still being a self. Your relation to your responsibilities, whether you are taking them up or not, is itself the sort of thing that that makes you uniquely you. And so this means that we are ourselves when we connect with others, when we consider how our actions have an impact on the world around us, and when we impose, even when we impose our need for attention on another person who is trying to be a self. Being a self is a skill that requires work. You can be more yourself and better as yourself if you put in the work to do so, right? If you are present and attentive and intelligent and reasonable and responsible, right? If you do these things, if you act out these possibilities, you are in the end a self. So there are a couple of things that I think connect strongly with the work of Severson here. Just getting my stuff together. Okay, good. All right. There are a couple of things that connect to the work of Severson. The first is that idea of selfhood and responsibility are intertwined, right? Selfhood and responsibility, they connect, no way around that. I forgot to, I have different pictures for tonight. So let's do this one. Here we go. This is, if you know it, it is the perfect show to watch along with reading ethics. Not a substitute for ethics. It is the perfect show to watch alongside. Being a skill... Being a self is also a skill that you can get better at, but it's also a skill that is limited by the situation in which you find yourself. There might be certain actions that you would love to engage in, but you are limited by your biology, or you are limited by your economic circumstances, or by your cultural circumstances, or by any number of things. And as you think about what kind of obstacles might be there for you, it's also helpful to think about what obstacles might be there for another person, right? This other person might not be your enemy. They might be somebody who is being lied to, or getting misinformation, or not understanding the consequences of their actions, and as a result, your judgment of them is unfounded, even as you are, in disagreement with them. In like manner, you might you might do well to think about the people that you engage with in terms of what is going on in the background of their lives, and how they might be wrestling with their own responsibilities and their own selfhood, and how that intersects with what you, as a human in the world, are trying to do. I find this both very difficult and also very helpful when you're driving. Why? Because when you're driving, people are making choices, and they're making really quick ones, and a lot of times those choices are being driven by the things that they are responsible for. And so in trying to be responsible, they can be irresponsible, right? In trying to get home with food so that people can eat, they cut someone off, and they're an irresponsible driver and put others in danger, right? And so it's helpful when things like that happen to think, they might not be a big old mean bag of dirt. They might actually be a human with a full inner life who is trying to wrestle with their own responsibilities, and are so focused on that they are unaware of the consequences of their actions, right? But that brings me to talking about Kierkegaard. I decided to talk about Kierkegaard at the end, and here we go. So Kierkegaard talks about selfhood as a relation. It is a self that relates itself to itself and expresses its selfhood in this relation. You express who you are in the way that you relate yourself to yourself, and that self is its responsibilities, is a being that is trying to be responsible and sometimes failing. But it is also a self that expresses that relation to itself not immediately, but in connection to the culture that you're in. And this is where a thinker that I really admire and am constantly challenged by, Frantz Fanon, I think has, and by extension, another really great thinker of identity. Oh my goodness, her name is escaping me at the moment. Alcoff. Man, I can't believe I'm blanking on her name, because I was just reading her book the other day. But Alcoff, building off of Fanon, talks about the way that our social identity figures into the decisions that we make. And for some people, it's about, I have to put on like a straight face. I have to put on sort of like stiff upper lip. It's a British colloquialism, meaning you don't allow like pain or emotion to come through. You hide from the world that which you are really feeling, because they need to see you as a certain way. But in other cases, as Fanon points out, Fanon living in Martinique as a black man under colonial rule at the time, is saying the leadership of my island, the dominant culture there, is a white French colonial environment that is challenging me by making me have to wrestle with who they perceive me to be and want me to be, which is at odds with the way that I see myself. Am I responsible for how another person perceives me? Yes and no. Is that fair? Is it right? Probably not. But it plays into the decision making you make, right? It plays into the decision making process. And in that sense, being responsible means thinking about how your public identity is caught up in attention with your subjective understanding of yourself. So, that was all fun and maybe overwrought, but needless to say, this Heaps essay, I think, brings some new dimension to how we think about one of the central themes of the course, which is responsibility and what it means to be an ethical person. And I think that there are some interesting challenges between Severson's more Levinasian approach and Heaps' more Kierkegaardian, Aristotelian, Lonerganian, Mr. Rogersian approach. Namely, how we think about selfhood relative to our obligations to others. So, I'm going to take a drink of water, and then we are going to jump into your questions. So, hold tight. Those are the sound effects you live for. All right. So, we are in a new section. We're going to jump to the final picture. There we go. Headed to our private island. Private. Our personal island that we got through the predatory lending practices of one Mr. Tom Nook. On the other hand, he does give you interest-free loans, so maybe he's not so predatory. Tom Nook is a complicated character. But we're not here to talk about Nook. We're here to talk about your questions. And so these are real questions from real class people, and I'm going to try and get through them. A lot of you were interested in thinking about responsibility beyond the way that we are taught to think about responsibility within the legal system, right? So in the legal system, we think about responsibility in terms of who is blameworthy, and Severson is pushing us to think about responsibility beyond what we are legally required to do, but instead to think about responsibility as our obligation to strangers, enemies, and others. And so what is a way that we could apply these new ideas of responsibility beyond just thinking about responsibility as it is tied to guilt? So I think that one of the ways that you see this happening, oddly enough, is in the growing awareness that whenever new projects are going to be started, an environmental impact study needs to be done. And not just the kind of, okay, this is going to increase the amount of water that we're going to need, or energy input's going to be this, but to think about it in the long term, right? Are we building whatever project in an area where the people who work there are likely going to live nearby and therefore not need to have multiple cars and need to have roads built and all kinds of new infrastructure built? Is there a way that we can move into an area where we are taking over existing infrastructure? Is there a way we can move into an area and not increase dramatically the amount of emissions that are occurring or negatively impact climate that way? Like, to think about it that way, to say, I'm not just responsible for having an office building for people to go into. I am responsible for thinking about how placing my building in a certain area shapes how I interact with the world around me, right? And that world not being also the non-human world. So I'm thinking about this in terms of, do you build closer to a population center, like in a city? Could be more expensive, but also there's a lot more existing infrastructure. People aren't going to have to move or drive as much. Or do you go out into the suburbs where, let's say, land is cheap and building materials are cheap and labor is cheaper, and as a result you're able to save money there? On the one hand, maybe you're able to save money and then you pay like a carbon tax or offset or things like that, and you are, you know, covering the amount of impact on the environment that you had. On the other hand, though, you're thinking more along the lines of what Severson is talking about. So this has been on a question that has been on my mind a lot lately, because my day job has me working in a place like the out in the suburbs type thing, and I spend a lot of time in a car surrounded by other people in cars, and I think about that question quite a bit. A couple of folks asked about taking responsibility, meaning not acting. And this actually reminds me of something that I remember having a good conversation with John Heaps about. And that was, don't just do something, stand there, was the way that he phrased it. And this was in relation to, I think, an essay he read by a philosopher named Slavoj Žižek. And the point that Heaps was trying to make, and that I think also is another point of connection to Severson, is that sometimes our attempt to do something good and to be responsible ends up really being either enabling or infantilizing or perpetuating the very ills we're trying to avoid. So for example, I had some students in a previous institution I worked for who were really fired up about issues related to racial justice and poverty, and they decided that they, to very thoughtful and caring middle-class white men, decided that they were going to start a nonprofit. They needed to start a nonprofit, and they could finally solve the problem of poverty and help people who needed it. And it only took a couple of very specific questions. So are you going to apply for a 501c status or 503c status? Also, who are you going to get as your advisory board, on top of which, what kind of funding structure are you going to use? Oh, we're just going to like go out there. It's like, oh, okay, so it's just volunteer. Who do you know of the people you want to serve? Like, did they tell you specifically they wanted help? No, no, we just assumed that that was the case. Oh, okay. So you assumed that people would need help, and not just need help, but need your specific help. You're unaware of the structure of your institution, unaware of what the specific needs of a community are, unaware of the history of similar efforts to yours in that community. You're just going to go. Yeah. Do you think they might be suspicious given that you didn't talk to them first? They might. And the point of those of us who were asking these questions of these young men was not to discourage them from helping, but was to say, maybe you should just stand there. By which I meant, maybe you should think about the people that you say you want to help and you want to serve. And if you want to do that, you need to do so in a way that makes sure that they are the ones driving the initiative, right? They are the ones who are having the most say in how they are aided. And maybe that means that you don't get to do some cool thing like you start, I don't know, like a sock company and you give away a bunch of socks. Maybe it means that you just go around to a bunch of other middle class folks like yourself and you say, hey, we're just going to give money to people and let them decide what they're going to do with it. Because we don't know. Maybe that's what it means. Maybe doing nothing is really about, rather than jumping in and saying, I know how to solve this problem, maybe it means I might assume I know how to solve this problem and might actually be irresponsible in making that assumption. We are going to talk about this question a whole lot when we talk about Nietzsche, because Nietzsche has a lot to say about this very idea. For Nietzsche, people who engage in these sorts of activities are oftentimes doing so because they think that it makes them look good, and it is just another way that they are exerting their own will to power. And that is a question that I think anybody who wants to live an ethical life, who wants to do right by other people, needs to wrestle with constantly. All right. Here is I think a very good question that will come up again and again and again. Trying to remember who asked it, but someone said, should richer people and countries that are wealthier be responsible for their less fortunate neighbors in the same way that a parent is responsible for their children, lending resources and guidance to help the child have a bright and successful future? Or is it fair that those countries have had plenty of opportunity to improve and haven't yet, so they or their governments are the only ones responsible? I'm going to change the picture one more time, because it's going to be a little cards on the table. There we go. There we go. If anybody can guess who this is, you get 1,000 non-points. So one of the things that we need to ask, those of us who are from the United States or Europe, anywhere that has a history of colonialism, we need to ask the question that Hela asks in Thor Ragnarok, right? There's this moment where she's talking about what Odin used to do and how now he just acts like, oh, Asgard is this wonderful place. Thor Ragnarok's secretly really thoughtful about the ethics of colonialism. while also being ridiculously funny. It's one of my favorite MCU movies. I don't necessarily think it's the best. It's close. It's close, but anyway. But she then makes this remark. Where do you think all this gold came from? Where did most of the wealth in Europe and the Americas come from? Came from extraction. I would highly recommend Galeano's The Open Veins of Latin America, which talks about the way that silver was mined, specifically from Potosi, which I believe is in Ecuador or Peru. Forgetting where it is, but it was the major silver mine that provided most of the silver found in Europe. It's extracted from South America. And to think about what is owed, to think about whether or not those who live in an economic system that tries to maintain itself with America, the United States of America in particular, and in Europe as kind of top of the heap, and everybody else kind of has to follow our lead, or collective lead. Whether or not that is the result of fair practices, and whether or not, well, I'd put it this way, and then we'll move on, because this is, I know I'm being kind of obtuse and sparse in what I'm saying, so I'm trying to think through this relative to what we're going to cover in class, and this will come up again and again and again. So I want to wait till we have more tools in our toolbox to really get into it collectively. I would put it this way. Let's say that you got a car, and you bought this car with your money that you earned. It's not great. It's a little bit older. It's a little bit dinged up. And then you go to a mechanic to get the oil changed. The mechanic says, hey, the vehicle identification number scratched out. Do you know what that's about? And you're like, no. He's like, most of the time stolen cars have that happen to them. Okay. In fact, police were talking about a rash of stolen vehicles recently from a neighborhood not too far from here. You should check that out. So the question that you have is, are you responsible to check it out because you did pay for this, but it is stolen? Likely stolen. Are you responsible to even just figure that out, whether or not it is or not? And whether or not the person it was stolen from even wants it back? You are not directly responsible, but you are contributing to the limitations that these folks are to the limitations. Sorry. Every time I get into a big point that I'm trying to make, I'm also having to pay attention to the live stream stuff, and I lose my train of thought. It's also later at night, so I apologize if I am being incoherent. Are you responsible for getting the stolen car back to someone from whom it was stolen, even if you did not steal it directly? The thinly veiled metaphor here is the stolen car could be stolen land, it could be silver, it could be wealth, it could be the well-being, cultural history of peoples who occupied the Americas before European settlement came to the Americas, right? Is a question we continually wrestle with, and I hope that you don't perceive my moving on from this topic to be a kind of cop out. Again, we will definitely get back to it. All right, 2 more questions, and then we're gonna call it a night. Okay. One of you asked about something specific to the example that Severson said. Namely, he talked about a broken window, and then his first thought was to pay for it rather than reprimand the students for being irresponsible and throwing a snowball that broke a window. I think that if you think about human beings as selves that are trying to figure out what it means to be a self and to be in the world, then you are thinking about human beings who are in a process. Human beings make mistakes. They don't intend to make a mistake. And Severson's first inclination to be like, I'm in a position where even though I might be less responsible than the person who threw it, I can actually help because it might be worse overall for this person who committed this mistake to be forced to pay for its repair than it will be for them to seek restitution in some other way. Because I think also what might have been, what is like just part of modern life is the paperwork and bureaucracy that you have to go through, the red tape you have to go through in order to just have a thing taken care of. And that maybe Severson being there and understanding what the situation was had a better idea than somebody who just be, oh, we'll just expel them. They were vandals, they damaged the property, we'll expel them. I don't know that somebody's going to do that, but, you know, it's a possibility. So I think that that is what was in mind. And I think that, I mean, I don't know. I'll have to ask him sometime. But I do think, too, that it's a good example of moving beyond thinking about responsibility purely as blame. And thinking about it as, how can I collectively help this group of people who maybe a mistake happened, but the consequence of that mistake could be far worse than actually just dealing with whatever specific damage happened, and moving on. All right, final question. Thinking about one's full responsibility in life. In thinking about one's full responsibility in life, is there a point where you are pushing off the true pain of being in the world in order to enjoy pleasure? Sorry, I keep bumping the mic, and you can probably hear it. Is there a point where you're pushing off the true pain of the world in order to receive some pleasure? Well, I'm not going to fully answer that question because we have this that we are going to start talking about. John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism. We're going to talk about this next week. And he specifically, I saved this question for the end because it sets up Mill really well, right? He conceives of ethics not in terms of responsibility, but in terms of pleasure and pain, or happiness and harm. That which produces the maximum amount of happiness and the minimum amount of pain is good. Anything else for your ethical principles that you're basing your way of thinking about what is right and wrong, basing your morality on, is going to have problems. But this, for Mill, this is what does it. And we're going to see if that is the case. So, thank you for joining me for this live stream. Cool. Uh, uh, what's up, Lawrence? Uh, I will answer your email. This is the also thank you for having the very end of the live stream be like peak college student. This makes me so happy, you do not even know. Thank you so much for that. So I will see you all later. Take care. Adios.